Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to episode 14 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. On this week's episode, AJ and I take you step by step through a proven process for ending ineffective ministries. Church leaders fear that if they end a ministry, they might lose their job or position. They're afraid they might step on the wrong toes or hurt the wrong person's feelings. More than that, many simply don't know how they'd even start the process of ending a ministry. The reality is that churches that don't end ineffective ministries will never reach their full potential. By the end of this episode, you'll know how to apply a proven strategy for ending ineffective ministries and when to do it. To read today's show notes and to access the free download we talk about in the episode, visit malfersgroup.com/14, the number 14. If you like today's episode, please subscribe and share with your friends in ministry. Now, let's dive in.
Okay, this week we are talking about how to end ministries in the church. A tough thing for a lot of churches and a lot of church leaders. And so, Scott, I am super glad that you brought us this article this week, and we're talking about it on the podcast as well, because this is a huge thing. It's a huge problem. It holds a lot of churches back because they don't know or they don't have maybe the leadership capacity sometimes to end a ministry. And so, man, this is a great topic. Thanks for bringing a really clear article to us.
I don't know if I should admit this out loud, AJ, but I like this process. It's a little fun to start going, okay, what can we cut and how can we do it? And honestly, it's because I love walking churches through this process and sort of pastors getting this aha moment realization like, I really can get rid of things that aren't working.
Yeah. I can relate to you on that. And it's sort of almost like that sigh of relief, or maybe that new fresh breath, of inhaling that clear air of, oh my goodness, my world just sort of opened up.
There really is another way. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, seeing, like a group of leaders kind of come alive with possibility when they're like, wow, we can clear away some of the deadwood and really focus on things that matter. There's joy in that. So yeah, I'm with you.
Earlier on in this year, it was like a big deal. All of a sudden, it's gone away. Do you know what I'm talking about? The lady who tidies up, and she made a show. It was on Netflix, The Joy of Tidying Up. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah. Wasn't that like Closet Organization or something?
Yeah, it's that. It's the joy of tidying up. When you start tidying up your ministries, there is like this weird joy that you get. We're like, I'm decluttering our ministry's schedule. It's freeing a little bit.
We just did that last weekend in my youngest son's room. It was absolutely out of control. And we went through there and we cleaned it up. And we did it with my other son, about 6 months ago. And now we just want to keep walking into his room. It looks so good and it's so useful. And he he can sit on the floor and, listen to music and like the things that he cares most about are within easy reach and visible. And it makes you just like appreciate the space. So yeah, I think that happens with ministries.
I mean, I don't want to make it sound like I'm some sort of sadist. Like, I can't wait to start slashing ministries. Like, I'm not a psycho. It's like, I know the joy that comes from being able to tidy up the ministries.
Yeah.
The challenge, though, AJ, as you know, is that it's not like throwing out old toys that you don't want to keep. You're talking about things that people have a real emotional attachment to. When you start cutting ministries, it's not like getting rid of old clothes. You're talking about getting rid of something that people have this emotional attachment, and
it's a keepsake for some people. Absolutely.
Really is. So there's a way to do it, though, and this is what we want to talk about today: how to end ministries gracefully.
Right. So yeah, to kind of set this up, we're going to talk here in just a few minutes. We're going to start talking about, first of all, when should we do that? And then we're going to walk through several points in how to end a ministry gracefully. And then finally, we're going to conclude with when is it the right time to just let something go more quickly? Like, it's time to just end this. So yeah, let's get started. So first, let's talk, Scott, about when should we end a ministry? What are maybe some of the basic criteria that should end up in the list of things that probably are going to have to come to an end?
Yeah. So let me first say, if you haven't listened to last week's episode or the week before even, probably start there because it'll give you some good background knowledge, more than I'm going to be able to give you right here. But essentially, if a ministry is not achieving the discipleship outcomes, so in episode 12, we talk about designing outcomes versus designing programs. And so you want to start thinking through, what is it that we're trying to achieve with all of our ministries? And if a ministry is not achieving those outcomes, then it's probably something you need to cut. Last week, we talked about how more nitty gritty, like how do we start evaluating the effectiveness of ministry. So again, I really encourage you to listen to both of those episodes.
Episode 12 and episode 13.
Right. But there's going to be things that you just can't fix. So my experience, AJ, has been that a lot of churches want to fix everything. They think we can salvage it. And without going into the weeds on our evaluation process, because I don't think anyone wants to try and hear all of that, I used to do green, yellows, reds when sort of evaluating the effectiveness of ministries.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've done more hard numbers, like giving numerical values, and there's a system for that. And the reason why I've stopped doing greens, yellows, reds is because churches wanted to put everything as a yellow. Like they didn't have the heart to say it's a red, it's a dumpster fire, it can't be fixed. They wanted to feel like everything could be fixed. And so, they would have, let's just say, 20 different ministries that they would put into the category of we can fix it, which is actually how to fix a ministry is a separate episode. What we're talking about is the things that really should have been put into these are the things we need to sort of sunset and get rid of.
Mm-hmm.
In our language, in our process, we call these abandoned ministries, things that you want to sort of abandon. And so I needed to come up with a way to get more churches to start putting things in that abandoned category. So side note, if you think that your church can get healthy by doing all the things you're already doing right now, like you are sorely mistaken. The only way you're going to be able to get healthy is to sunset or abandon some of the things that you're doing right now. So I needed a concrete way to do that. And I did that by making it more objective and adding numbers to the system. At any rate, so we end a ministry when it's not achieving the discipleship outcomes. It can't be fixed. I can't rearrange that ministry in a way that it would be effective. And so we got to be putting more things in that category. And then we got to have our goal be to end that gracefully, sort of put it out to pasture, send it to a farm somewhere where it can live out the rest of its days and just be gone.
Yeah. So again, check out episodes 12 and 13 for a little bit more background on how to evaluate ministries. But sometimes they do need to come to an end, and definitely need to stress, don't try to fix everything. I mean, look at it, put your big picture glasses on and view everything that's going on in the church. And you just don't need to keep everything. You probably have some clutter, and there's other ministries that are either already more effective at maybe the same exact thing, or that's where your effort should be. Put it into this other ministry that's closer and let this one go.
Yeah. And I always tell churches when I'm working with them, like anything that you decide we're going to keep this thing and fix it, means you're making a commitment to actually fixing it. You can't just give lip service and say, we're going to fix it. You have to make a real plan for how you're going to fix it. And so if you put 20 things in that category, that's 20 individual plans you need to make to fix those ministries. And that's oftentimes that's just too much for a church to commit to. And so they don't. And what ends up happening, AJ? They just keep doing what they've always been doing. They don't ever actually change. And then they don't see the results they were wanting to see. And we're back at square one.
Yeah. And, part of the other point to this is we have finite resources. So finite resources in time, in money, in building the space. There's just lots of things that go into it. Sometimes even these things, they may not actually be the resource draw that it seems like they are. They're relatively low resource draw, but when you've got several of those, they just become sort of mind clutter. And you've got to be able to clear that stuff out too. And because that's what I think a lot of churches try to do that. Well, they're only here for an hour a week, and it's like $10 for them to do this or that, or $100 a year. And so they rationalize it again, and it stays in the program list.
Yeah, you're jumping ahead a little bit on me, AJ, but you're right. It's sort of death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm just still trying to set up that we've got things we think they don't need to go because they seem so benign, but we really got to consider that. All right, so let's jump in. So we've got 3 points that we're going to run through here on how now to end a ministry. So Scott, your first one is to starve the time. So what do you mean by starving time away from a ministry?
Yeah, so let me circle back actually. Let's talk about the principles in general and then we'll break them down point by
Okay,
point.
great.
Okay. So ending ministries gracefully is a 3-step process. There's 3 things you need to do. And AJ, you've already said the first one. We have to
Mhm.
starve it of time, which I'll explain here in a minute. You have to starve it of resources, which you've also already hinted at. And we have to starve it of attention. So if you want to end a ministry gracefully, you have to literally starve it out of time, resources, and attention. So, yeah, so let's hop into the first one then, starving it of time. To starve a ministry of time means you have to stop putting it on whatever your official calendar is. So when you do your calendaring for the year, most churches have like a calendar meeting once a year. Maybe you have a online calendar that shows all of the current events. My wife's home church from growing up, we still get their newsletter for some reason. Not sure. We, as a married couple, have never attended there, but she gets it. It's fine. On the back of the newsletter once a month has the church calendar. Like it has all the events and all the different groups that are meeting at what time. So you might do something similar. That would be the official calendar I'm talking about. You have to stop putting it on that calendar. So the group can continue to meet. This is the key point, AJ. The group can continue to meet during whatever time slot they were. So let's use an example of women's knitting circle. Okay. So we have determined that the women's knitting group can't be, like, let's say grow groups is our primary ministry for a growth step on our discipleship pathway. We've determined that it's not a grow group because they don't do a Bible study. They do have good fellowship there, but they're not really praying for one another, not in an intentional way anyway. And they're never going to do a Bible study. Like, that's just not what it is. So we can't fix it. They knit. It's not even a good candidate for a secondary ministry because we can't use it to feed people into a primary ministry, which is how we use secondary ministries. We use a secondary ministry as a step up into something primary. And the knitting group's never going to be that because it's the same 5, 6 women who get together every week. They have for 20 years.
Yeah.
So it's a great candidate for something to sunset.
And they're really mean to the crochet group. Just hateful.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So they meet 2 Thursdays a month at 6 p.m. in room 102. Okay. They can continue to meet, 2 Thursdays a month at 6 p.m. in room 102. You're not telling them to quit meeting. But in the past, you've put them on the calendar. Like you've said, women's knitting group at 6 o'clock, these 2 Thursdays a month in room 102. You're just no longer putting them on the calendar. They're welcome to continue to use the space, but they're not on the calendar. And they can continue to do that so long as it doesn't interfere with a primary ministry. So, for example, if you need room 102 on the Thursday of VBS week at 6 o'clock, they would get ousted for the VBS. That probably is something that's already happening, but it can happen for other reasons. Like if you're adding more groups and one of your groups needs room 102 on a Thursday night, for a grow group needs it.
Yeah.
Well, grow group gets to use it because that's a primary ministry. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. You got to prioritize.
Right. So you would treat it on your calendar the same way you would if an outside community group wanted to use your facility. So you wouldn't put that on the calendar. Like if some community ministry or organization wanted to use your facility for something, you would say, sure, but you wouldn't put that on your official calendar because it's not your event. You would treat it very much that way.
Got it. So starving time from a ministry is where, it's going to sort of become out of sight, out of mind. It's not something that we have to put any mental effort into planning anymore.
That's right. And you don't have to tell them you can't meet anymore, right?
Yeah.
We're just not putting it on the calendar. They can continue to meet.
Great. Okay, that's point number 1, starving time. So let's talk about point number 2, starving resources from it. Resources can sometimes be kind of a broad thing, and so I think we definitely need to bring some clarity to that. So what do you mean by starving resources?
Yeah, so certainly money. You're not going to give it any money in the budget anymore. And AJ, you already hinted at this, like maybe they only have $100 budget a year anyway. Like they've not taken a big piece of the pie, but it's not about that. It's not about that they were taking a lot of money. It's that they're a ministry that's taking money away from something that is moving the ball forward. They're not moving the ball forward. It's not consistent with where we're going with our vision. It's not making and maturing disciples. And we're not funding anything anymore that isn't making and maturing disciples and isn't moving us towards our vision.
That's probably one of the bigger points that needs to get made whenever because again, we start dealing with relationships and emotions. And I think probably a healthy point that has to be made is that we're not targeting the knitting group because we hate knitting or we hate Edna and Gladys and the other ladies.
Or even that it's because it's that much money.
Yeah, or right. It's that it's not one of these other best things that we should be doing and that we're going to narrow our focus down to. It just doesn't fit in there. It doesn't meet the criteria that we set, kind of hearkening back to last week's episode 13. And so, I guess that should be maybe a helpful hint for the conversation that will end up happening is to depersonalize it.
As much as possible.
Yeah, depersonalize as much as possible and always come back to here's the main things and why we're doing the main things. We've got to maintain a really clear why or explanation as to why we have chosen certain things to do so that it's understandable, for the things that don't fit in there.
Yeah. And so here's a really key point though, and don't miss this. You need to give a 1-year grace period on that. So even if they're just getting $100, they need to know going into a budget year that this is the final budget year in which they will have money. So they need to know that from the beginning. So like, let's say going into 2020 budget year, January, you say to the women's knitting group, hey guys, just so you know, 2020 is the last year you guys are going to have budget money. We're making significant shifts, next November when we're redoing our budget for 2021. And I just wanted to give you a heads up now that this is the last year that you guys are going to have these funds available. So they know way in advance. And yeah, they'll have a panic attack and they'll be, it's going to take some leadership on your part and some pastoral discussions to work them through that. But you don't want to gotcha anybody about taking away financial resources. So even if they have a very small budget, give them a year to get used to not having it. Tell them way in advance. Some of you are listening to this and going, well, I've got my women's knitting group or whatever that equivalent is in your mind isn't getting any money anyway. And so it's not just money resources, it's also people resources. Well, first on the money resources, they might not be asking for, your women's knitting group might not be asking for money, but they might say, hey, well, people donate yarn. Hey, visit the Connection Point booth and donate yarn. We're making blankets for homeless people or whatever. You can't have them do that. Like it's the same idea. They're asking for something from the congregation. We're not doing that. But then also no people resources. So this means they're not going to get a direct overseer on the staff. They can't ask for volunteers. They can't, none of that. We're not feeding it with people either. So we're not feeding it with money. We're not feeding it with people. They're not taking away your precious time, your ministry time by overseeing the Women's Knitting Circle group. They are truly on their own. We are abandoning them. And that's a hard term, but you really got to think of it that way. You are setting them off to pasture. They're on their own now.
Yeah. So we've starved a ministry of time. We've starved it of resources, both monetary and human resources. Number 3, Scott, you've got down here that we're going to starve it of attention. How does that differ from kind of what we've already talked about?
Yeah. This is where you're most likely actually to get conflict and pushback. Because a lot of ministries that are in this bucket maybe aren't getting all that much calendar attention anyway, and probably aren't taking many resources anyway. The one thing that they want is attention. What I mean by attention is you communicating their events. So putting the Women's Knitting Circle in the bulletin, maybe printing it on the calendar, putting some sort of a shout out on social media, putting it in the newsletter, putting it in this, putting it on the website, on yada, yada, all the things.
We communicate things in many more ways other than the official calendar that helps us to manage our resources. This is just more communicating in maybe more informally or sometimes formal ways. Yeah.
Announcements from the stage, pre-service slides, all the different avenues that you have for communicating things. We are no longer giving them access to any of those. We're not putting it in the bulletin. We're not putting it on the website. We're definitely not saying anything from the stage. And this is something you have to manage. So this is where you're going to get pushback. People are going to say, hey, wait a minute. You won't even put it in the bulletin. They're going to take that personally. I can remember, the church that I was on staff at most recently, we were a church plant, and this was early on in our growth. So we were only a church of, I don't know, maybe 100 or 50, 150, 200 maybe at the time. We had a lady in our church who was pregnant, and some other ladies in the church were throwing her a baby shower. And that was just not the kind of thing we were ever going to put a pre-service slide. We definitely weren't going to do an announcement. We didn't even have a bulletin. We were too poor to be able to afford printing one every week, so we didn't have one of those. So we just weren't going to communicate it. We weren't even going to put it out on social media. We were like, it's like 10 people who were going to show up to that thing. Just talk to them. Talk to those 10 people who are going to show up. And the lady who organized it was upset about this. She thought, no, like, you should announce this. This is a person in our church who's having a baby. We should announce this. Well-intentioned, but we said no. Anyways, she made signs herself. I know, AJ, how much you love handwritten signs.
Oh boy, don't get me started.
She made handwritten signs, several of them. She didn't even photocopy them. She wrote out baby shower today at such and such place at such and such time. She made like 10 of them by hand. And then she went around, we were meeting in a YMCA at the time. She went around the YMCA, AJ, and she got tape and she taped them up all around the YMCA.
Wow.
And so what do you think we did?
Did you have a difficult conversation?
Well, first we had to take all the signs down.
So you were passive aggressive initially.
Well, it was right before church, so we were busy.
Oh gosh, so uncomfortable.
Yeah, no, it was fine. I live for that kind of thing. So
yeah,
we already established in the last episode that I'm the bad cop. But we took all the signs down, and then we had an uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable. It was an awkward conversation, and we just said, you can't do that. And so to make that conversation easier, that was a long story to get to the takeaway I want to give you, which is create a communications flowchart. Depersonalize this as much as possible. So give people an objective tool that they can use that helps them work through. Does this event or ministry or program apply to more than 50% of the people in the congregation? No. Okay. Does it connect to this? Blah, blah, blah. No. Does it connect to this? Blah, blah, blah. No. Then by the time they get to the bottom of that flowchart, they're going to be told, we can't do anything for you. All of your communication is going to have to be internally managed. And that helped. So the lesson for me was we should have had a tool like that already. And when we had told her no the first time, we should have been able to give her a tool like that and say, here's why we can't. Because otherwise people take it personally and go, you're telling me, like, you can't do that for me. Right. Why can't you do that for me?
Yeah.
Versus going, hey, we wouldn't do this for anybody. The trick is, and this is important, AJ, you have to stick to that.
Sure.
So like, you can't make exceptions. Like when it's the youth pastor's wife who's having a baby, you announce that baby shower, but you didn't announce that one.
There can never be an implied note at the bottom that says, for exceptions, email senior pastor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Create the communications flowchart. And we actually have an example that's linked in the show notes. If you go to malfersgroup.com/14, you can download a sample. That way you can see what one looks like, but then you can build your own. You should build your own. And then that's going to help a lot when you start having this. And again, manage the transition. So if they've been getting bulletin announcements, you can't tomorrow say no. Roll that out over time. Say, hey, yeah, I'm going to do it this time, but starting in March or whatever it is, we're going to start transitioning to this communications policy. Here it is. Take a look at this. And then they know in advance. Don't spring it on them. People don't like surprises.
So always lead from the positive when the positive is possible. What I mean by that is you can always answer these things by we're implementing this new communications policy because we want to make sure that the primary things that are helping us make disciples really stay in front of people well. So this is what we're going to communicate now primarily from this point forward, instead of your stuff doesn't fit well anymore. And so you're not going to get your stuff printed anymore.
Right. I am positive that what you want to announce won't work in the bulletin anymore.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Right. Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Just like you would if any other change that needs to be made in the church, you always want to quote unquote sell it from the positive. Here's the benefits of this change that we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. Not, hey, here's what's broken that we need to cut out. So, there's just kind of a little side leadership tip there.
Yeah. And people are going to get it. They're going to go, you know what? I'm not getting my way anymore. And people are going to be upset. Just know that. If you're looking for the way to do this where no one's ever going to have hurt feelings, that doesn't exist.
Right.
Someone's going to get hurt feelings, but you can make that easier or harder on yourself by how much leeway you give and how effective you are at communication. So that sort of ties in, AJ, to emotional intelligence, just knowing how to read a person and read the conversation. And
understanding the best way to communicate with them by understanding the way that they best take in information and process. Yeah, absolutely.
Stick to your guns. Emotional intelligence doesn't mean capitulate just because they're upset. It means finding a way to continue to do what's best and navigating your emotions and theirs as well.
Yeah, great point. All right, so you gave us 3 great points on ending a ministry gracefully by starving it of time and of resources and of attention. So that was sort of our little middle section here on this episode of ending a ministry gracefully. So let's move into now the situation in which a ministry needs to end in a different manner, in a little bit more, immediate or abrupt manner.
Yeah, so your goal should be ending things gracefully when you can, but there are 2 situations where you would want to pull the plug quickly. The first one's not a negative thing. It's because no one cares.
Yeah. We should hope for that, actually.
Yeah. Sometimes people will actually feel relieved when you cut a ministry. So there's no need to drag it out and end it gracefully when it's something that no one likes or no one cares about. The graceful thing is to just quit doing it.
Yeah, it may have already gracefully ended itself, but you're still kind of hanging on to it by possibly doing one of these other things of keeping it on a calendar or giving it some kind of resources or attention.
Yeah. I can remember a time where we had this conversation with the church, and one particular really small ministry came up that just one person was running that ministry. And when we started talking about cutting it and that person caught wind of it, they said, wait a minute, you mean we can cut this ministry? I don't have to keep doing it? They had been running this ministry single-handedly for like 3 years because they felt like they had to. And so when they caught wind that we could cut it and we could stop doing it, they were like, oh, that would be such a relief. So there were other people on the team who were like, well, maybe it would hurt their feelings if we cut the thing immediately. And that turned out not to be the case. They were relieved when they found out we could just end it. So that would be situation number 1, is when you have something that no one cares about or people be relieved that it was gone, cut it quickly.
Yeah, okay.
The second one, and this should be very rare, okay? So I just want to be clear about this. Most of the things that you end, you're going to take that long road to ending it. Some things, though, you have to pull the plug on. And the reason why you would do that is if it's holding back your primary ministries. So most of the ministries that you need to sort of sunset are distractions from what matters most, but they're not actively holding back your primary ministries. And so when we talk about primary ministries, we're talking about your Sunday morning service, or if you're transitioning to grow groups or whatever. But occasionally you're going to have a ministry that if you keep it going, even in a limited fashion, it's going to hold back your primary ministries no matter what. And it would be really impossible to starve it of time, resources, and attention. So let's just take an example, AJ. Occasionally, I can think of a church actually here not far from where I live that started to experience some significant growth. And they were in a building that wasn't huge. And so they needed every scrap of space that they had that was classroom space for children's ministry. They just needed it because they had more kids than they had children's ministry space for. So they needed to make room for more kids. So they had to get rid of Sunday school. They just had to stop it. It was sort of born out of necessity, which helped that transition. People were like, I get it, but it wasn't easy either. So they transitioned to groups. But sometimes a church doesn't have a space problem, but they still have decided, hey, we're switching to groups and we're not going to do Sunday school anymore. And you can't do both. Like if you're going to make a firm commitment and say, hey, we're going to do home groups, and you've decided we don't want Sunday school classes to become grow groups because we really think that groups should happen in homes. Let's just take that as an example. Like I'm not suggesting that you have to do that. I'm just suggesting that sometimes churches make that decision, right? You can't continue to do Sunday school also.
Yeah.
Because it's a distraction from what you've said is primary, which is a home group. Does that make sense, AJ?
Yeah, absolutely.
It would always be competing. If you've said Sunday school is not a primary ministry, if you've made that declaration, then you can't keep doing it because it's going to be constantly draining attention and resources and time and all of that. You can't sequester it off and set it out to pasture. It's just too big of a thing. So you actually have to pull the plug on it and say, we don't do Sunday school anymore.
Right, yeah. Even this will have probably had an announcement. This isn't like one Sunday to the next, all of a sudden we have groups. So you still would have been talking about this, only there has to be a cut point in which, you make that transition.
That's right. But the contrast is something that sort of you're sunsetting can take like 3 to 5 years, AJ, to die off entirely. This would have a very specific window of closure. Next fall, we are stopping Sunday school.
If you don't, the danger is then that those, last couple groups that really aren't, or the Sunday school classes that aren't really buying into the group thing, they're just like, well, let's just keep meeting.
Right. So you've got to set those parameters. And again, very few things. I work with churches where nothing fell into that category, or maybe only one thing did, because it's an extreme case to say, hey, I'm pulling the plug on this right away, or within 6 months or whatever. And you are going to spend a lot of relational capital doing that. So you better be really sure that that's a smart move, and it's really going to drive you forward in your vision, and it's really going to help you be more effective in making maturing disciples. Best case scenario is to sunset things, to what we call abandon them and let them sort of die, wither on the vine, so to speak, over 3 to 5 years. If you're going to just yank the cord on something, you better be sure it's going to drive you forward, because you will spend emotional capital, ministry capital, relational capital on that. So you better be positive that it's worth it.
Yeah. So fortunately in ministry, those are going to be more rare. And in most cases, we will be able to cover your previous 3 things on ending them in ministry gracefully, much like a plant needing soil, water, and sunlight. We've got 3 things of time, resources, and attention that keep ministries alive. So, Scott, this was a really great topic this week, and one that I know is probably going to resonate with everybody listening.
Yeah.
If you're interested in the Church Revitalization podcast, you probably have ministries that you need to consider. First of all, whether by assessment they're effective or not. And then after determining which ones are and are not, figuring out how to stop doing some things so that you can do the right things in their place. And so this was definitely a necessary topic. Scott, it's fantastic. And thanks for bringing it to us this week.
And let me say real fast before we end, the pushback that you're going to hear, AJ, and that I hear when we work with churches is, okay, yeah, like we can really do this and not get fired the next week. If we start saying, hey, we're going to sunset things, I'm going to lose my job. And the thing is, probably you won't. I mean, I don't want to say for sure you won't, because maybe there's a situation where you would. But honestly, if that were the case and the church just went up in an uproar because you're talking about streamlining ministries to be more effective, that's not a church you want to serve in anyway. Honestly, it's never going to be healthy.
Yeah, that's true.
But secondly, that's not been the situation that I've encountered. Most churches are willing to go, yeah, we need you to sacrifice these things. Besides, you're not telling them to have to stop. You're telling them you can continue to do what you're doing. You're just going to be doing them without the time, resources, and attention that you've been getting. And when people start to realize you're not telling me that I have to quit, you're just telling me I'm going to have to do it on my own, they're open to that concept.
Yeah.
And so don't panic, okay? Push through, do it, manage the transition, but it really does work, and it's necessary. If you're going to get healthy, you got to start scaling back.
And so, yeah, along with what you're saying, this is not a topic that you start with. Today's podcast is not for you that just woke up this morning and is like, I want to revitalize my church. I'm going to start here. This is not your starting point. This is in the middle. By the time, you're at this point in a process, in a health and revitalization process, you have already talked to your church about the necessity of being on mission and what you value as a church and how you're going to organize your ministries to accomplish your mission and what your long-term vision is. And so, this is a middle ground, a middle process topic today, but that, helping you understand that it fits into a process.
Right. It's one part of the process.
That's right. So hopefully your church is you've got them to the point because you're a great pastor and a great leader, and they're ready for this.
You can do it.
All right. Hey, thanks again, Scott. So thanks for listening this week to the Church Revitalization Podcast. For today's show notes, please visit malfersgroup.com/14. That's the number 14. And we'll be able to provide you then with more of a written version of what we've talked about today. And be sure and share this with other friends and leaders in ministry so that they can benefit from this as well. And subscribe to the podcast so that you can catch next week's exciting topic as well. Thanks again to you, Scott, for bringing us a great article. And thanks for joining us this week. God bless your ministry and your family.
See you next time.